In the aftermath of Monday's federal election, with the seat count remaining mostly the same, there are questions about how Parliament will work and how parties other than the official opposition will leverage their power.
We used our position successfully to win some really big victories for people, for Canadians. They were better off because we were there. And we'll do the same thing.
We need to repair these divisions. We need to ensure that whatever wounds were created during this election are not permanent, because the people of Canada clearly are saying, we want you to work together.
Okay, so how much leverage do these parties have, and what do the election results mean for their own leadership? It's Thursday. I'm here with that issue one more time this week, for touch wood anyway. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. We talked on Tuesday now about the Liberals and the Conservatives, so I wanted to spend some time on the other parties this week and sort of how you think they will contribute to Parliament working or not. Chantal, let me start with you. How do you think the Bloc or NDP uses whatever leverage they have inside the House of Commons? Do they have concerns around leadership, either of them?
The leverage, very, very carefully, because neither of them was really rewarded in any significant way for its influence in the last House of Commons. So the notion that people would really think that the NDP, with about the same number of seats, having spent most of its money, would have a knife to the throat of the Liberals would be a problem. Mm-hmm. And a fundamental weakness in the Bloc was exposed over the course of this campaign. It got fixed temporarily by what happened over the English language debate, but it is still there. So, yes, Justin Trudeau has a minority government, but neither the Bloc nor the NDP can push too hard because they can't afford to go back in a campaign.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to me a pretty fascinating storyline there, Andrew, too, because, yes, we've all ended up sort of where we were, but there are weaknesses still for everybody that they have to be careful with.
Yeah, the gun has been taken away from the Prime Minister, there's no doubt. So he doesn't have the additional thing of being able to call an election now, but neither can the opposition be seen to be forcing one unless there's a really good reason and the public is not going to be terribly favorable to anybody who calls this election anytime soon. So yes, everybody has to tread cautiously. Nothing much really has changed other than, as I say, the Prime Minister having lost a little bit of his position. I think you always measure these things against expectations. In 2019, Jagmeet Singh did better than they thought the total wipeout they were expecting, and so he got a lease on life. I think he got a second lease on life here because this Liberal government had been pushing so hard to the left, had been trying to take so much of the ideological ground for the NDP, that plus the usual, you have to vote for us to keep the Tories out. I think many New Democrats will just be relieved that they were able to withstand that kind of pressure. So I think Jagmeet Singh will be safe for now.
I want to hear everyone on that, because I think that is also interesting to me, given that they were shut out of the GTA. But Althea, just on how you think the parties will use their leverage first.
Well, everybody is weaker, I think, as my colleagues have suggested. Nobody is eager to go into a campaign, except perhaps Erin O'Toole. But on the NDP and the Greens and the Bloc, like we even heard Yves-François Blanchet say that he intends to reach across the aisle to speak to the other political parties to make this Parliament work. And I think that was the lesson Canadians sent their political leaders. And for some, that is a lesson that they will keep, because it serves their political interest, as well as, I think, with the message that we heard on Monday. I think that the Conservatives are less likely to sing from the same songbook, even on policy areas where there could be areas of agreement. I'm thinking about housing policies or increasing the workers' benefit, for example, because Erin O'Toole in his election night speech that sounded kind of like a victory speech in some ways, basically threw down the gauntlet and said that he's ready for a campaign if it happens within 18 months. And the one thing that unites all Conservatives, whether they're progressive Conservatives or Reform era or Harper era Conservatives, is a hatred of Justin Trudeau.
Chantal wants in there, and Chantal, weigh in on Jagmeet Singh's leadership too.
But I'll start with Erin O'Toole and the fact that Conservatives are mostly going to be focused on winning an election in Ontario and watching the damage from and the fallout from what's happening in Alberta. Maybe the Conservatives in the House of Commons do not want to cooperate with Justin Trudeau, But the premier, who is the premier of the largest province and who happens to be a conservative, surely sounded like he wanted to. So someone somewhere will have to reconcile that. On Jagmeet Singh, well, it depends. I mean, if the NDP spent a lot of money on this campaign and got very little in exchange, if they're happy with being the fourth party in the House of Commons, fine. I mean, they can celebrate no gain. But otherwise, they have not been a contender for power, and nothing in this election has brought them closer to that.
Andrew, you can weigh in on that, and I want everyone to weigh in on Annamie Paul, too, who came in fourth in her bid to try even win her seat, Andrew.
Just very quickly on Jagmeet Singh, I think, there's relief, I think, in the party that they didn't do worse. So, yes, they didn't do any better. If there's one leader, I think, whose future is really in doubt, I think it remains Ms. Paul. She did better in the debate than had been expected, but that party has so many internal fights still to resolve.
Yeah. Althea.
I agree with Andrew on the future of Annamie Paul. I think that we might get better indication whenever that convention is supposed to be rescheduled for the Green Party. And for the NDP, I think Mr. Singh is in a weakened position, but I'm not entirely sure it's his fault. I know there's a lot of New Democrats on the ground who are disappointed that the party spent a lot of resources, and a lot of resources that rightfully belong with the writing associations, to support a national PR campaign for Mr. Singh to build his brand, but that didn't translate into additional seats. So there is definitely some angry people within NDP circles, but I don't think that's going to cause serious leadership review in 2 years.
Yes, Chantal, you want in there?
Annamie Paul, I think, should have resigned on election night, given that she put all of her resources on winning a seat and came in fourth. Clear message and clear wrong decision on running there. As for Jagmeet Singh, I mean, the problem with the Jagmeet Singh campaign was not so much that people fled to the Liberals, it's that they had no reason to stay with the NDP, except that the leader is congenial.
Yeah, I sort of wondered that too. I mean, how much time do you legitimately spend on TikTok and social media, knowing that that may not translate into votes? And how much time do you spend talking about issues? I'm not sure that what happened on Monday is a real validation of that strategy, Andrew. It's curious to me.
Well, I think, like the Conservatives, they may have put too much stock in the idea that people are going to be so repelled by Justin Trudeau that they would recoil in their direction. So in the NDP's case, since the policy differences had become minimal between the two parties, you could have basically the same policies, but a more likable leader, one who didn't disappoint you, one who didn't let you down, et cetera, et cetera. And it just didn't seem to get them any gains, that's for sure.
Are we at a place where the Green Party is not really a player anymore, given that all parties have actual climate change plans now? You may think some are more effective than others, but is the Green Party no longer something that people should be considering at all? Because I think there's a real question about what it represents, Althea.
I think it's a good question. I think if they had put forward a plan that was more realistic, I think, having Andrew Weaver, for example, the former BC Green leader, come out and endorse the Liberals' plan as being the best plan, and you had experts also endorse the Liberals' plan as opposed to the Greens' plan, I think that took away a little bit of emphasis for voting Green. But I think mostly the problem reside with the leadership. I think if Elizabeth May had been leader of the Green Party would have done a lot better. You feel like a lot of that protest vote that the Greens had shifted elsewhere in this election campaign.
Chantal, on that point.
Of course, if you now have become a voter for whom it's a ballot box issue, action on climate change, you're going to want to look for a government that does something and not for a fifth party that has no official recognition in the House of Commons. I think what would help the Greens is if the Conservatives got really serious about climate change. And then they could argue that whoever is in government, the Green Party is useful to push them to go faster. But as long as there's that divide between the two main parties, and you can't argue that the Conservative plan was on par with the Liberal plan, voters who are now concerned about climate change are going to make their choice between the two most likely to be in government to implement something.
About 20 seconds, Andrew, to you on that.
Just to say, it may be that the moment is past for them in terms of their environmental evangelism, but the Green Party also stood for a different way of doing, stands for doing, I'm talking in the past tense, stands for a different way of doing politics, less brutally cynical, less party discipline, more autonomy for MPs, electoral reform. And so I hope they stick around. I hope that message can still be a part of the political landscape. I think that's a valuable message to be bringing to the public.
Today, we made history. Canadian politics will never be the same again. When we started this campaign 5 weeks ago, everybody thought we would only be a footnote. My friends, this is not just a political party. It is a movement. It is an ideological revolution that we are starting now.
That's Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party of Canada, addressing his supporters on election night. The PPC did not win any seats, but it did increase its vote share. So what does that mean for the future of the party? Chantal, Andrew, and Althea back for another round on that. Althea, I'll start with you on this one. Is this, as Maxime Bernier says, a movement? Is it moving in the right direction? Is it a legitimate force that will have some growing strength in the next election, do you think?
I think it's too early to tell. 800,000 plus people who voted for the PPC is not an inconsequential amount of people. That is a lot of people. But a lot of people seem to have voted for the PPC because of COVID, whether that was, mask mandates or COVID lockdowns. It was not an embrace of Maxime Bernier's libertarian agenda. And I don't know if once we're past COVID, hopefully soon, voters are going to embrace Maxime Bernier's libertarian agenda. When you even look at the candidates and what they were running on, it seemed some of them had no idea what the PPC stood for. The PPC, for example, is not, one of their things is not family values and the traditional definition of marriage. I mean, Maxime Bernier is a live and let live and a pro-choice person. That didn't fit in his PPC party, but people kind of used the PPC as a bandwagon for whatever side issues they had as well. So I don't know if it's here to stay, but it's certainly in the short term something that cannot be ignored.
Yeah, I think that's my thought too, is that there was an opportunity with the pandemic that they embraced, but whether you can recreate that, I don't know. And I'm not sure I quite understand what the party represents, divorced of all the stuff around the pandemic, Chantal. So how do you and maybe that's the kind of question the Conservatives are asking too, who did see some of their vote share lost to the PPC.
So how many parties have you seen that have managed to survive without having any representation in the House of Commons, and for how long?
Yeah.
And the answer is none. Maxime Bernier is so no longer a prophet in his own country that he lost in a Beauce, a riding that used to elect him and his father, by a share of 3-1. So somewhere, yes, it's significant. It's driven by the pandemic. But at the end of the day, Maxime Bernier's party is not able to elect even someone who used to be elected easily in Beauce.
That's an awfully good point. Andrew.
It's interesting to think if this election had been held on the schedule that it was set out in law 2 years from now, I don't think the Bernier's party would have gotten a lot of oxygen between now and then. So this was the perfect time to have the election for him, because they could capitalize on this free-floating public anxiety, at least among certain sections of the public, about vaccines, and ride that into a little mini boom. I agree that it's going to be hard for him to sustain it, but I wouldn't, if I can put it this way, I wouldn't underestimate him. What Bernier has revealed himself to be in the last couple of years is not this sort of principled, if far out for a lot of people, ideologue, but an utterly ruthless, utterly unprincipled person who will say absolutely anything, no matter how reckless or harmful, and who has basically trafficked in any number of conspiracy theories and far worse. It's taken under his wing the most reprehensible elements politically. That kind of demagoguery, that kind of willingness to just traffic in anything, is more reminiscent of Donald Trump. And while there isn't nearly the same size of audience for that in Canada as there is in the United States, it may prove to be an enduring audience. It may be that if you just keep moving to whatever is frightening people, you can still keep rolling up at least some representation in the polls, if not in the House.
Okay, interesting thoughts on all of that. Thank you all. We'll see you soon.